Hey everybody, welcome back to our fifth, I think so, virtual tasting. And today we are going to be focusing on two different wines from 2017, both of our Cabernet Sauvignon wines, the San Ynez Valley and the Estate Los Olivos District. But before we get into the wines, this package was sent out in celebration of Father's Day. So I wanted to wish a happy Father's Day to all the fathers that are joining us today, I guess including myself. A special shout out to the Beckmen fathers, of which there are 4 in the immediate family. And also a quick shout out to Cassie's father, Ray Wilson. Happy Father's Day to Ray. And also cool that we're joined today by some old longtime members and friends, Tim and Kathy Phelps, who are tasting today along with the Hubers, also some longtime members. So it's good to see everybody out there. Actually, I can't see you, but you guys can see me. So we're going to jump into Cabernet Sauvignon. Like I said, both the 2017 wines. And just to get into it a little bit, I just want to touch on Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm not really going to go into too much detail. It's a pretty well-known, widely planted, well-experienced grape out there. So unlike some of the other varieties that we've dealt with here, I'm going to kind of skip that part where we kind of look into what the variety is all about. But here in Santa Barbara, Cabernet Sauvignon has been around for as long as there's been vineyards here and wine being made here, going back into the late 60s and early 70s. When we moved here in 1994 and took over this winery and started making wine and Beckmen wine, pretty much the word around Santa Barbara County and really in the central coast of California that Cabernet Sauvignon was just not a very successful variety for us. And a lot of our neighbors and industry people at that time were definitely encouraging us to maybe look in a different direction. When we purchased the winery back in 1994, we did inherit a vineyard that was 16 acres, and a part of that vineyard had some Cabernet Sauvignon on it. And so we were stuck with Cabernet Sauvignon. I guess not stuck with it, but we started with Cabernet Sauvignon as our red wine here, and we've really stuck with it. And I think the reason we stuck with it was really the wine itself. We had an older block, an older vineyard that was planted in the early 80s to own-rooted Cabernet. And when we took over in that first year in 94, instead of just harvesting the whole block, we just harvested it in little sections. It is a hillside, so there's a hilltop and there's a slope and then there's a bottom layer where the soil is much deeper and richer and the vines were a lot bigger. And what we found was that the fruit off of that hillside vineyard was really, really promising. Kind of didn't have some of the things that plagued historically the Cabernet Sauvignon wines of the time from Santa Barbara County, which was a very herbal, green, vegetable-like quality, whether people wanted to call it a bell pepper or to me kind of a V8 juice, where you had this kind of mix of celery and tomatoes and maybe things that are unique in a wine, but maybe not like what we were looking for in our Cabernet Sauvignon wines. And we weren't alone. A lot of our neighbors, had that same problem as well. And I think Santa Barbara just has a really different climate. We have a season here that is a longer season. We are a more temperate, more even climate throughout the year. And I think maybe Cabernet Sauvignon historically has been grown in places that have maybe a shorter season and maybe a season where they see more intense heat in shorter periods of time instead of over a longer period of time like we have here in Santa Barbara. But we stuck with Cabernet just based off that first wine in 94 off of that hillside. And then eventually we got around to redeveloping and replanting this vineyard here at the winery estate, which is the home to mostly our Cabernet Sauvignon program. And in doing the replant, we wanted to stick with Cabernet, but we wanted to do some things different. And one is to take these larger blocks, which just basically covered this hillside, and divide it up into smaller, more contiguous blocks. So we actually have that one big block is now divided into 4 blocks that kind of, surround and take care of the 4 sides of the hill, if that makes sense to you. So in doing that, we have, more even ripening, more contiguous slope, more contiguous aspect, where we can now just go into those blocks and basically harvest from one side to the other. The blocks are quite a bit smaller as well because they've been broken down as well. And then the other things that we wanted to do were just to introduce some better material, some better vine material, some better clonal material, and then also introduce some rootstock onto the property as well, because the initial vineyards were all own rooted. And then we wanted to really tighten up the spacing. The initial vineyard here had really wide spacing. I think there was something like 420 or 30 vines per acre. And now we're up to almost 1,400 vines per acre on the current planting. So a lot denser of a planting. I think all of those things that we did, and this is going back to the early 2000s. This was around 2002 or 3 in that area when we did the replant and redevelopment on this property here. And really, since then, have been really even more excited about the prospects for Cabernet Sauvignon. And also in that time, the area as a whole, as it's been subdivided more into these smaller AVAs like Happy Canyon and Los Olivos District and Ballard Canyon, I think there's been a revitalized focus on Cabernet Sauvignon, to where it's not being planted in Santa Rita Hills where you grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's being planted more in those eastern areas where it is a little bit warmer. So areas like Happy Canyon have a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon or Bordeaux grapes planted into them. And also in the Los Olivos district, there's still quite a bit of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Franc, Malbec, Petit Verdot, those Bordeaux style varieties. And I think that we can do some really special things here. And I think we do now do some really special things here with Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think that that's, really become the focus now of some of these more eastern inland AVAs in the San Ynez Valley. So with that being said, Cabernet is something that we still strongly pursue. Again, really happy with the quality of it, and we make a few wines based on the Cabernet Sauvignon. The 2 that we're showing today, the Cabernet Sauvignon San Ynez Valley, the Estate Cabernet Sauvignon Los Olivos District, as well as the TLB Cuvée, which is actually a co-fermented blend of primarily Cabernet Sauvignon with a little bit of Syrah. So I know that's very popular for us, the TLB, so popular that we rarely have it available for sale outside of the futures program or outside of the wine club shipment. So with that being all said, I don't know if any questions or anything have popped up. Nope, everybody's pretty quiet on that end. So I will just keep on rolling into my spiel. So we have the 2017 vintage that we're going to be doing today with both of these wines. And just to touch a little bit on the 2017 vintage, we'd come out of that period starting in around 2012, really through 2017, where we were in a pretty severe drought. We had a lot of, hot years, real lack of rainfall. And 2017 rolled around and it started to rain, and it rained quite a bit. I think it rained more in 2017 than it had rained in probably 4 or 5 years all added together prior to that. So the vintage, really got off to a great start. We had, well-saturated soils, these soils that hadn't been really saturated and leached in a long time, had that in 2017 with our 25+ plus inches of rain that we had in that vintage. And we had a vintage too that wasn't necessarily as hot as it had been over years like 13, 14, and 16 in particular, which were all very, warm, kind of early ripening vintages. 2017, we did have our fair share of warmth and heat into it, but it wasn't quite as extended and as extreme as it was in those other years. That coupled with the added rainfall, the saturation of the soils, the vintage got off to a little later start than many had in the previous several vintages prior to that. And then also with a little bit of later start, it got a little bit more typical harvest time, let's say, for us. So where in 16 and 15 and 14 we were harvesting grapes starting in the beginning of August and then finishing in early October, where our normal historically is to start more in the beginning of September, maybe the middle of September, and then harvest through the beginning of November. So 2017 was a little bit more like some of those historical years that we had, maybe a little bit more typical as we look back through the 25 plus years that we've been making wine for a vintage here in Santa Barbara, albeit we did have well over twice the amount of rainfall that we had. So what the rainfall did was provide just a great start. The vineyard was super lush that year. Obviously, with all that water, we had plenty of growth and plenty of canopy. Along with that, we did not have a massive crop, but it was a really nice size crop. I would say probably right around average in size. And the harvest started, with really, nice conditions that year in September. With like Sauvignon Blanc and stuff like that. The Cabernets obviously harvest a little bit later than that, and typically are harvested in October and into November sometimes. And in 2017, we definitely had more of an October harvest time for our Cabernet Sauvignon. So the first, we do have somebody commenting or questions.
Wine Club member Kay is wondering the Los Olivos Cab, how long should it be open to appreciate it?
Well, that's a good question, Kay, and we'll definitely get into the wine a little bit, but just real quickly to answer your question, I mean, the wine is young. If we look at our Cabernet Sauvignon program going back over 25 years, the wines, they typically age very, very well, actually surprisingly well in some cases. So I would say this, that the 2017 Los Olivos wine is a bit on the young side to be drinking it. If I were to drink it now, I open mine and put it in a glass here for, probably maybe just 15 minutes before we started. But if I was going to drink the wine, I'd definitely put it into a decanter, give it a decant for an hour or so prior to opening it. And with that, I would just maybe, if you have the room and you have the desire, you can always put a couple bottles away and enjoy it, maybe without the decanting in an additional few years, maybe 3 to 5 years or something like that. The wine will age, probably over 20 years. I mean, just looking back on our Cabernets and even maybe the not so great ones that we made at the beginning, even those are really, pretty interesting wines over time. So you definitely have that, ability for long aging wines with this variety and with these wines. So, okay, so back to the two wines in question today. We're going to start off by tasting the 2017 San Ynez Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, so it's my glass here. And with this wine, we really, one of the few wines, actually, this wine and the Sauvignon Blanc are the only two wines of the last couple of years where we've actually been purchasing a little bit of fruit. So this wine is made with predominantly our estate Los Olivos vineyard fruit. But it's also blended with some purchased fruit that we get just basically right around this Los Olivos district area, kind of running from the Foxen Canyon, Los Olivos Foxen Canyon area down towards like Armour Ranch Road. There's a couple of vineyards that we've worked with for several years and really happy with the quality. It really is fun actually to make wines like this again. I mean, it's fun to make wines anyway, but to make wines where we're blending, not just our 2 sites or 1 site or whatever, but we're actually can blend with some different vineyards, so we have access to, more clonal diversity, and then just different, layers of flavor, because I've talked about here before how we like to build our wines through these various picks and various lots, so we have this nice broad palette of flavors to work with when we go to blend and complete a single wine. So we have that quite a bit with this San Ynez Valley wine, because not only do we have the diversity of our own little vineyard with our couple different clones and our 4 different blocks that we actually 5 different blocks that we harvest here, we also have that diversity coming off those vineyards. So I want to say there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 7 different clones of Cabernet Sauvignon that are blended into the San Ynez, and it's 4 different sites or vineyards that are blended into the wine. And when we go to craft this wine, we want this wine, unlike the Los Olivos wine, to be a little bit more open, to be a little bit more ready, to be more accessible, younger. So this is a wine that I, would just pop and pour. It's not a wine that really needs any decanting. With that being said, it's still a wine that's going to age, for many years as well. But in crafting it and the decisions that go into making it, as far as picking decisions, as far as, extraction and fermenting decisions, and as far as, oak and aging decisions, the idea is to make a more fruit forward, to make a more accessible, young drinking wine. So hopefully you get that character and that quality in the 2017 San Ynez Valley. So I'm just going to take a little drink of it and see how it is. I have had it before, but it's been a little while. So immediately, it gives you a pretty big impression of being forward. It's got a lot of aromatic quality to it. On this wine, we actually utilize some very interesting American oak barrels, which is really giving it a lot of that upfront, real sweet kind of vanilla quality that this wine has aromatically, and then certainly on the back end as the wine is long and that flavor spectrum of vanilla, sweetness, a little caramelized quality is coming from those American oak barrels, and they're really interesting barrels that we use on that wine. They are grown in America, and they're grown typically in the upper Midwest towards kind of the Appalachian area where we like to get our wood from, our barrels from. And these barrels that we use are pretty cool. They're actually made by some Australians, and we harvest the wood. They harvest the wood here, and then it's taken down to Australia, where it's air dried for a couple years down there before being crafted into barrel. And they just are able to capture just some really, really sweet tones in their barrel. Those vanilla, even a little bit of like coconut. I know it's kind of weird to throw coconut in that mix for a Cabernet Sauvignon, but I definitely think that's an impact of the barrel. We'll get to the question. I just need to finish my thought. The sweetness on the palate, I think, also comes from that oak, and it's also an oak that's just really forgiving. It just really adds a lot of broad, real kind of soft tones and textures to the wine, which I think is all a part of that, fruit-forward, kind of younger drinking, soft style. So I'm ready.
Question was, do you blend the fruit before making it into wine, or after the fruit is made into wine?
That's a really great question. So all of these vineyards, they don't ripen on the same day and ripen at the same time. So, and even our own vineyards, they're picked over many, many days, and sometimes even over a couple of weeks. So just like everything we make, everything is done in a small lot. So it's all micro vinified. Our biggest fermentation tank for a Cabernet Sauvignon wine is a little over 4 tons. And once it's in that tank, it kind of becomes its own lot. It kind of becomes its own, part of the overall blend. And so with that being said, all of these individual picks are kept by themselves in the beginning. And then once they finish their malolactic fermentation and have aged a little bit, it's typically around this time of the year. I would say the end of June and July are the moments when we're actually doing the assembly, the bringing together of all these micro-vinified lots of Cabernet into this wine. And so I haven't, maybe I'm a little bit behind schedule, I don't know. I think I'm kind of on schedule with the last couple of years, is that we're just getting to the blending of the Cabernet Sauvignon San Ynez. We've already completed the blend for the TLB and for the Los Olivos district. Because similar to the Syrahs, we kind of look from the top down. We look for the limited higher end bottlings first, like we'll take that TLB and we'll find the lots, and typically they're coming out of the same lots just about every year. And then again with that Cabernet Estate Los Olivos wine, we'll identify those lots early on, we'll make that blend, we'll keep it isolated and separate from the San Ynez wine, which will basically take up pretty much all the other lots. At least we hope it takes up all the other lots. I mean, some years, some things just cannot turn out. I mean, it happens, and it just gives us an option of maybe not blending it into any wine or finding another home for it in some other wine, like maybe the return of something like the Big Hands label, which could be coming back soon. Yeah.
I have a question. Have these cabs gone through malolactic fermentation?
Yes, they have both completed malolactic fermentation. All of the red wines at Beckmen complete their malolactic fermentations. So it's just really, I think most red wines in the world probably complete their malolactic fermentations. But yes, definitely they have both completed their malolactic fermentation. I think with Cabernet, just to talk about that a little bit, if you didn't put it through malolactic fermentation, I think you would be left with too much of that malic-y kind of quality, which is going to probably make the wine lean towards its little greener side. I think both of the wines here have this kind of herbally quality to it. And I think with a lot of malic, and the Cabernet tends to have a bit more malic acid to it typically than like a Syrah does, or definitely like more than a Grenache does. So I would, just want to put the wine through malolactic fermentation just to get away from some of that, malic-y quality that you can get both in, flavor and texture. But what you do get in the 17 San Ynez Valley is a real mouthful of a wine. It definitely has a ton of, sweet fruit. I think, cherries and cassis, and that, flavor spectrum is really typical for our Cabernet Sauvignon fruit. You definitely get that nice, vanilla sweetened quality from the barrel coming through. It's quite broad and round and soft. And one of the really cool things about our Cabernet Sauvignon in general is that it tends to really, hold its acidity pretty well in our more moderate climate. So with that being said, it has a really nice kind of, acidic structure to it without being overly acidic. So it just provides enough of a backbone and a structure to keep the wine focused and to keep the wine centered. And I think in the San Ynez wine, you get a little bit of a lower, it's a little lower in acid when you go to the, 100% estate wine, the Los Olivos district wine. Because some of those vineyards that we buy from, they don't maybe have as high a quality of acid as we have on our own grapes here. But I think that also adds to that, kind of seductive quality, that round quality, that approachable quality that the 2017, San Ynez Valley really shows. The wine is really developed well in bottle. It's really just enhanced its texture. It's very integrated at this point in all its components, and I think it's in a really nice place for drinking over the next many years. So in contrast to that, we get the Los Olivos district wine, and aromatically, I smelled them and tasted them before we did the tasting. You definitely get a different quality to both of these wines. There's kind of a darker, slightly darker hue, I would say, color-wise to the Los Olivos wine. And you just get like a different quality to it. There is some oak in there, but it's not really that vanilla-y kind of thing that you get in the San Ynez wine. It's a denser quality to it for me. I also think that there's a really nice kind of earthy, almost loamy, soily quality that I get out of our estate Cabernet Sauvignon wines, and I definitely get that in this wine. To me, it just has kind of it's kind of hard to describe this, but it has a more focused aromatic profile to it, where this one is kind of broad, if that makes sense. This one is just, more dense and focused, and maybe just a touch more concentrated and a little bit more on the darker side of the spectrum, where this wine has kind of more that brighter fruit spectrum. So this wine is definitely made a little bit differently. It is harvested from, really what have turned out to be our best blocks of Cabernet Sauvignon that we grow here at the estate Los Olivos District Vineyard. It's just a denser wine to me. That the San Ynez has this real broad, quality to it, and the Los Olivos, and you can just see by my lip smacking, has, a more structured profile to it. It has acid to it. It has some tannin to it. That really, kind of salivate and make you kind of want to go back and have another sip, which is a great thing. And maybe I'll just flip to the map real quick so that we can just see the estate vineyard here and see where these wines are coming from. And if you look at the vineyard, this color here is the Cabernet Sauvignon, and this is the main part of the Cabernet Sauvignon. And you guys, whenever you visit, you drive right through the Cabernet Sauvignon. You got Cabernet Sauvignon on the driveway to the left and to the right as you come into the winery property and make your way down to the tasting room area. So the San Ynez wine gets fruit out of what we call block, I think it's 5 now, but we call it G because it was originally a Syrah block that was grafted to Cabernet Sauvignon. And then it has this block, which is block 1, and then block 4 is the biggest kind of block out here. Actually, these two are almost the same size. But part of that wine from the hillside, this part of it, goes into the estate wine, and then the other part of it goes into the San Ynez wine. And then this block here is called block 2, and the pond where the gazebos are is right here. So it's that, I reference it by being the pond block. It's kind of the block that goes off the pond. And I'm not necessarily sure why, this side of the slope is a little better typically than this side of the slope, but historically this block 2 is a big part of the estate wine as well. So it's kind of a combination of this block 2 and what we call block 4 out here, but typically just the hillside, the upper part of block 4. And you can't really see that on the map there, but it is contoured that this is the high side and then the low side is down here. So actually our vineyard tour does a lot of work right here in block 2. So part of our vineyard tour that looks at this head train Grenache and then kind of contrasts it with the trellised, hedge-like Cabernet Sauvignon in block 2 is maybe something that some of you guys have even walked through and seen and looked at. So these two particular blocks, and again, it's funny when you plant a vineyard that looks, when you're looking at it, it's just ground, it's hillside or it's flat, and you really, you have an idea based on soil tests and temperature histories and all these other things, what's going to work and what's not. But it can be surprising when you get into the nitty gritty, the difference in quality between these set of rows versus these set of rows over here. And honestly, you really don't know that until you plant the vineyard and you plant the ground and you start making the wine. We knew based on the history of it that we had some really good stuff coming out of what is now our new Block 4, but the original old vineyard. What we didn't know was how good it was on the pond side of the slope as well, because that historically had been planted to Sauvignon Blanc and some Chardonnay. So it was, a new discovery for us when we redeveloped the vineyard, just how, good the quality can be off of that side of the hill as opposed to kind of I would say more the southern side of the hill more than the northern side of the hill, which I guess makes a little bit of sense when you put it that way, because typically, the south-facing side is going to get, that more impact from the sun, and certainly when you're trying to make ripe California style Cabernet Sauvignon, which is what we try to do, you need some of that sunlight. So it's kind of a cool wine in that it's contrasted with this north slope and the south slope all off of that hillside. One of the things that I think makes this particular property so successful with the Cabernet Sauvignon grape is in the soil. We have some good, weather all the time and, good warm temperatures here. But the soil here has a tremendous amount of rock. It has a lot of gravel to it. It's a really well-drained soil. And that is maybe one of the reasons why, I think the main reason why we're so much more successful historically on this vineyard with Cabernet Sauvignon than we were on Purissima. Purissima has all that clay and it has limestone. It has such a heavier, wetter soil to it. Maybe a soil that traditionally Cabernet Sauvignon doesn't love so much. And to have it over here on this site where you have a lighter soil, you have that gravel, you have that drainage, you have a soil that warms up a little bit quicker in the springtime. It also can dry out a little bit quicker as well. But I think that's also an aid and a benefit to when we're growing our Cabernet Sauvignon, to grow it on these more gravelly, these more well-drained type of soils, because it really helps with us getting to the ripeness level that we're really shooting for when we're making our decisions to pick these particular wines. Now, another big difference between the San Ynez wine and the Los Olivos wine is in the choice of barrel. We definitely look for a very high-end Bordeaux traditional barrel to make our estate Los Olivos wine, and we have a couple of French coopers that we use in particular on this wine. We cannot necessarily use some of the heavier wood that is utilized in parts of Northern California. Our fruit is just a little bit more delicate than it is, let's say, versus a Napa Valley or Sonoma County Cabernet Sauvignon. So it doesn't maybe necessarily take that big, barrel like they can use up there. But we found some really nice, more delicate barrels that, have that nice interplay of fruit and wood to them that really allow us to highlight the fruit that we grow here on the property, on the estate property, without overwhelming it with too much oak. So yeah, we have another question.
Bruce is wondering, how many vintages do we get out of each barrel?
That's a really great question. Now, for a wine like Cabernet Sauvignon, we're going to be using the barrels when they're younger. So we'll like new barrels, we'll like once-used barrels, maybe even a twice-used barrel. And definitely when we get in the San Ynez wine, we're using, a proportion of twice and 3 times used barrel. So once these Cabernet barrels have kind of used up their oakiness or their oaky quality, they're considered like a neutral barrel. At that point, they can transfer into some of our other wines and our other programs, whether that's with Grenache or Syrah or into Cuvée Lebec. And so on average, here at Beckmen, if we keep a barrel sound and clean, we can use it for 10 vintages. which might seem like a lot. But for us here at the winery, it's very important for us to have a combination of newer barrels and also have a good solid foundation of older barrels, because so much of the wines that we make here with the Lebec and the Grenaches are really benefited by those barrels when they have some age on them, right? So the Cabernet, the Syrah, they kind of suck up all the oak quality out of those wines, and we use those barrels first on those wines, and then they're transferred into the other programs. So, we're a winery where our new barrels and old barrels, carry equal importance. It just depends on, what wine we're looking to make and what varieties we're looking to age them in. So yeah, thanks for the question. That's a really solid question. And believe me, when you're dropping, $900, $1,000, $1,100, $1,200 a barrel for a really high-end, Bordeaux barrel, you would hopefully get a lot of years of use out of it. So, we're really, happy that we have the ability. We think, that the oak is really, it's important on both of these wines, and there's all sorts of different camps out there of people who, and winemakers who like oak or don't like oak or whatever, and I just, like I just said, I think that there's a real importance to having in this winery the newer barrel and the older barrel, and you really need to, match and fit those barrels for the wines that you're trying to make. So a wine like the Los Olivos district wine, this is primarily aged in a new barrel. I mean, I want to say probably 75% of the barrels are brand new when they're used on this wine, and the balance is probably just a once-used barrel. So a barrel on the Cabernet program that was used 2 vintages ago. So on the 17 vintage, we would have had 17 new vintage barrels, but we also probably would have had a couple of vintage 15 barrels on this wine as well. And I do think that you do need a bit of a combination within each wine that have a balance. It's rare for us here to make a wine that is 100% brand new barrel. I can only recall just a couple of super small production wines here that we've ever made that have been 100% barrel. Now, this wine has much less new barrel on it, and we actually use a barrel that's a little larger. So in this wine, we use very traditional Bordeaux size and shaped barrels, but on this wine, we actually step up. We use, which is actually a 60-gallon barrel, I should say. Whereas on this one, we wind up using a lot of 70-gallon barrels. And some really smart person at Gallo, I think these are called Gallo barrels because of their size, just figured, hey, these are almost the same size. They fit on the same racks as a 60-gallon barrel, but you get 10 gallons more of volume in them. So, which is good because you get a little bit less of a ratio of wood to wine. So I think that adds in the softness and roundness to this wine versus the more, focused quality that you get in the Los Olivos wine.
Yeah. Remind us how long the SYV was in barrel for?
The SYV, it doesn't get as long in barrel. So one thing when you use a lot of new barrels on a wine, some of these barrels take a long time to get fully integrated. Like I said, using a lot of the American barrels that we use on this wine and a lot of the neutral barrels, because about 70%, maybe 65% of the barrels used on this wine are more neutral. The wine is ready to be bottled a little bit sooner. So we'll bottle this wine, in that 16, 17 month range of barrel aging, whereas this wine, we're more in that 20, even plus, 20 plus. Sometimes we'll go even over 24 months on occasion with this wine. This particular wine was aged about 22 months in barrel. So it was bottled in August of, 2019? Was that last August? Yeah, so last August it was bottled. So yeah, really good question there as well. So really interesting for me to taste both of these wines together. It's rare, honestly, that I taste them together for some reason. It's pretty rare that I taste the Los Olivos estate wine, because there's just honestly so little of it made, that typically, I'm a good boy and I don't drink it all myself. But, trying to run the business here and, sell a little bit of that wine to you guys too. So I don't, really get a ton of opportunities to try this wine. This wine is something that is poured way more often, both here at the winery when we're open, and out there in the market when we're actually out there doing market work and seeing accounts, which we haven't been doing a lot of lately. So I definitely get a chance to try that San Ynez Valley quite a bit more than the estate Los Olivos. And just in trying them today, I think the 17 estate Los Olivos is a bit young. I think the wine definitely needs to be decanted. I definitely would allow, several more years of bottle age on this wine. But I think, and I think I could say I know at this point, that in 5 or 7 years, this wine is going to just, pick up more, body. It'll round out more. It'll, soften even a little bit more. It's always going to have that nice acidic backbone, which is going to really help the longevity of the wine, because that acid really helps and prolongs the life of these wines. I mean, to me, this wine will be able to age 20 years, and it should definitely, go more than that. I know that a lot of us don't age a lot of wine anymore, and a lot of us don't have the space, honestly, to age wines like that for a long time. But we do periodically have Cabernet Sauvignons that are available out of the library. So I'll mention that again too, that we do have a few older vintages. We honestly didn't do as great of a job, I guess I didn't do as great of a job holding back more of these Cabernet Sauvignon wines so that our library was fuller of them. But we do occasionally have, 1 or 2 selections of an older vintage Cabernet available in the library at a given time. And even occasionally we'll have a TLB wine available from the library. So, cool. Yeah, we have somebody else has a question.
What would you eat with these wines? What food pairings would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need to go. Let's just take them both separately, because they are a little bit different wine. The San Ynez, I think has a versatility to it that maybe the Los Olivos doesn't have right now, today. For this wine, you're definitely looking at something that's, pretty solid and probably in that, I hate to say it again, but meat or steak kind of realm. Whereas the San Ynez, because of its approachability, it's kind of lighter touch, I would say. Maybe you could branch out into pastas with this wine, into pizzas this wine, into barbecue. It's just in that, style that just gives it a little more diversity or adaptability with food at a young age. Whereas this one, it almost needs a cut of meat right now to really show what it's going to show and what it's intended to show, which is, a wine of pretty good depth and character and structure. And so I think that, food combo just really goes along with a wine like that, where, the San Ynez is just yummy and you can just sip it and drink it and on its own. So, yeah, really good question. So we're all good on the questions. I enjoyed going through these wines again with both of you, or with both of these wines, with all of you. Hopefully there's more than 2 people out there. So I just want to thank everybody for joining me today and wish everybody good health and happiness. And we are debating virtual tasting in July as we get deeper into the summer. Getting things to people can be, in a timely fashion, can be a little bit more challenging. So if anything, we'll look towards the end of the month to do something. And probably it should be something summer related. I can think of something right now that we haven't done on a virtual tasting, which is the Cuvée Lebec. So maybe we'll do something with the Lebec next time, because that's like probably its own 45 minutes to an hour itself. And we actually really have some really exciting news about the 2018 Lebec that we're going to be announcing when it's made public in the next several days. So again, thank you guys for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the tasting, and we will be in touch really soon. So take care and stay healthy.